never believed a single object could rip open the scars of 3 generations until I found the box. It was small, wooden, and locked, tucked behind yellowed Christmas decorations in my grandmother's attic. The dust was thick enough to choke me, and when I pulled it free, my fingers trembled like the box itself had a pulse. A smell of old cedar and perfume rose into the air, a scent both comforting and dangerous. Something about it told me this wasn't just forgotten storage. My grandmother, who'd passed away 2 weeks before, had always warned me never to go near the attic. She used to say, "What's buried up there should stay buried." But when I pried it open with a rusty screwdriver, what I found inside shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't money. It was a secret that had been waiting to explode. My name is Marigold Crane, and I'm 37 years old. I was raised in a small Ohio town where everyone knew each other's secrets, or at least they thought they did. I work as a paralegal, divorced 5 years ago after my ex-husband decided commitment wasn't his style anymore. My son, August, lives with me half the time, and on the nights when the house is empty, silence eats me alive. My grandmother, Celeste, was the anchor of my childhood, the one person who made me believe in unconditional love. She was elegant but hard, the kind of woman who never let life break her posture. Now, standing in her attic with this box open in front of me, I realized she had been hiding the kind of truth that could burn a family tree to the ground. The first thing inside wasn't what I expected. It was a stack of letters bound in red ribbon, each one marked with a name I'd never heard before. Eleanor. I froze with the letters in my hand. The handwriting was undeniably my grandmother's, flowing, perfect cursive that seemed to dance across the page. But who was Eleanor? The first letter began with words I couldn't unsee. To my dearest love, the one I was never allowed to keep. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought I might faint. Love letters. Hidden in the attic. My grandmother had been married to my grandfather, a stern retired steelworker named Walter, for 50 years before he died. Their marriage had always looked rock solid, even though he was cold, even cruel at times. I remembered the way he barked orders at her during family dinners. But she stayed. She always stayed. And now, these letters suggested she hadn't just stayed. She'd lived an entire secret life. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the wood creaking beneath me, and read until my throat closed. Each letter was filled with longing, passion, and promises my grandmother never dared to keep. Eleanor was described with tenderness I never saw in Grandma Celeste's everyday life. Her hair like autumn fire, her laughter the only music worth hearing. My grandmother confessed how she was trapped in a loveless marriage for the sake of reputation, how Eleanor was her true home, her hidden world. My fingers shook so badly I could barely hold the pages. How could the woman who baked us cinnamon rolls every Sunday and tucked me in with bedtime stories have lived with this storm inside her? The deeper I dug, the darker it became. At the bottom of the box was a photograph, edges frayed, colors fading. 2 women sat side by side on a bench in a park. My grandmother and Eleanor. Grandma wore a summer dress I'd never seen, and her smile was wide, unguarded, alive. Beside her, Eleanor's arm brushed against hers, a closeness that said more than words ever could. I flipped the photo over, and in faded ink it read, July 1962, our forever. My chest tightened. My grandmother, the matriarch who preached sacrifice and duty, had been living with a forbidden love. And the cruelest part, she'd buried it so deep, even her children, my mother and uncles, had no clue. Or maybe they did, and that was the real secret. I didn't realize I was crying until my tears smudged the ink on one of the letters. I wanted to stop reading, to shove everything back into the box and pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. The truth had already clawed its way into my blood. What haunted me wasn't just the affair. It was the pain. Why had she been forced to bury Eleanor? Was it family pressure? Society's judgment? Or had someone actively ripped them apart? Questions burned in me. louder than the creaking of the old house, louder than the wind rattling the attic window. And then, tucked beneath the letters, I found something that made my stomach drop. A court document. A last will and testament, unsigned. The name on it wasn't Walter's. It wasn't even Celeste's. It was Eleanor's. I clutched the paper, my hands trembling. Why would my grandmother have Eleanor's will hidden in her attic? The document left everything. An entire inheritance to one name. Not Celeste. Not any family member I knew. Name. Marigold Crane. I felt the blood drain from my face. Why me? How was I connected to Eleanor? My throat closed as memories of family dinners, whispered arguments, and unexplained silences rushed back. All those times my mother dodged questions about Grandma's past. All those moments my grandmother would stare out the window, lost, when love songs came on the radio. My chest rose and felt like I couldn't get enough air. And then, as if the universe wanted to drive the knife deeper, I saw the date on the will. August 14, 1987, the year I was born. My mind spun so fast I thought I might collapse right there in the attic. The implication was too heavy to carry, but it screamed at me all the same. What if Eleanor wasn't just a lover? What if she was my blood? Could it be possible that my grandmother had kept more than just an affair hidden? Could she have kept an entire truth about who I was? My son's laughter drifted faintly from downstairs, grounding me back in the present, but it wasn't enough to silence the storm. If Eleanor was tied to me, then everything I knew about my family, my identity, my history, was a lie. My fingers dug into the wooden floorboards until splinters pricked my skin, and I swore aloud, I will find the truth, no matter who it destroys. I closed the box, but the weight of it seemed heavier than the entire house pressing down on me. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just recipes, lullabies, or Sunday prayers. It was betrayal. It was forbidden love. It was lies written in looping cursive, tucked away in shadows, waiting for me to unearth them. I wanted to scream, to run into the night, but instead I sat there, clutching the photograph and the will. The attic seemed to breathe with me, like it had been waiting decades for this moment. And then I heard footsteps downstairs, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be my son's. Someone else was in the house. Someone who didn't want me to know what I had just uncovered. The sound of footsteps echoed from the floor below, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging secrets across the wood. My breath caught in my throat as I froze in place, clutching the dusty box to my chest as though it could protect me. My son, August, was only 10. He wouldn't walk like that, not with such weight. My mind raced with possibilities. A burglar? A family member who knew about the attic's hidden truth. My grandmother's voice rang in my head, sharp as glass. What's buried up there should stay buried. For the first time, I wondered if that warning wasn't just a figure of speech. My body screamed at me to stay silent, but my heart thudded so loudly it felt like whoever was downstairs could hear it pounding through the walls. Every instinct I had told me that the discovery I'd made tonight was no longer safe. I set the box down gently and crawled toward the attic door, my knees pressing into the creaky wood. I prayed the floor wouldn't betray me, but every step groaned like it wanted to give me away. Slowly, I pressed my ear against the thin door, straining to hear. The footsteps had stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the kind of silence that carried intent, like someone was waiting, listening back. My throat tightened. If this was just August, he would have called out for me by now. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but I'd spent enough time working in law offices to know silence was rarely innocent. Then, just as I was about to open the door, the light switch downstairs clicked off. The entire house plunged into darkness, except for the sliver of moonlight spilling through the attic window. Whoever was down there didn't want to be seen. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to think. I couldn't scream for help. Not without risking August. I needed to get to him quietly. Slowly, I turned the attic door handle, but it squeaked, a sharp sound slicing through the silence. My breath hitched. A voice, low, gruff, and unfamiliar, rose from below. Marigold. My blood turned to ice. Whoever it was, they knew my name. That one word carried weight, like they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to open that box. I backed away from the door, my body shaking uncontrollably. How did they know I was here? How did they know I'd found the box? My grandmother's secrets weren't just hers. They were dangerous. Someone had been guarding them all along, and I just triggered whatever they'd spent decades trying to keep hidden. The old house groaned again as the intruder shifted below. I could almost feel their presence, the pressure of them climbing the staircase toward the attic. My heart slammed against my ribs as I looked around, desperate for something, anything to defend myself. My hand landed on a heavy brass candlestick sitting on a shelf, tarnished but solid. I gripped it so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't a fighter, but tonight's survival outweighed fear. The footsteps resumed, each step closer, deliberate, steady. The air grew colder, as though the house itself disapproved of what I'd uncovered. "You shouldn't have touched it," the voice whispered again, closer now, echoing up the staircase. My skin prickled with goosebumps. That wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here to talk. He was here to silence me before I learned too much. Then, all at once, the footsteps stopped just outside the attic door. My breath came in shallow gasps. I raised the candlestick above my head, my arms trembling under its weight, and waited. The door handle turned slowly, deliberately, testing the lock. My grandmother had never installed one. She believed honesty was enough to keep a family together. Tonight, that decision was a curse. The door creaked open an inch, then another, moonlight spilling into the narrow gap. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, ready to swing with everything I had. But before I could, August's voice rang out from downstairs, high-pitched and groggy. "Mom? Are you up there?" The footsteps froze. My heart nearly exploded with relief and terror. My son had just exposed himself, and whoever was outside the door now knew exactly how to reach me. In that single second, instinct took over. I shoved the box beneath an old trunk, hiding it from sight, and bolted across the attic. I pushed the window open, the frame squealing in protest, and leaned out into the night air. 2 stories below, the backyard spread out in darkness, the old oak tree stretching its arms like a lifeline. If I had to, I'd climb down. Anything was better than being trapped inside with a stranger. Behind me, the attic door creaked wider, and I caught the faint outline of a shadow slipping inside. I didn't wait to see his face. "August, run!" I shouted into the night, my voice breaking. The house erupted in chaos, the intruder lunging forward, August calling for me, and my own desperate scramble to survive. My grandmother's secret had become a noose around my neck, and someone was ready to tighten it. But then, just as quickly as it started, everything went still. The shadow retreated into the hallway, the sound of retreating footsteps fading down the staircase. I stayed frozen by the window, candlestick still raised, my chest heaving like I'd run miles. My son's voice echoed again. "Mom!" This time it was closer, trembling with fear. I rushed out of the attic, my legs weak but determined, and scooped him into my arms at the bottom of the stairs. His small body shook against mine. "Who was that?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer, not yet. All I knew was that someone wanted the box kept hidden, and they were willing to scare me, or worse, to make sure of it. I kissed August's hair and whispered, "We're okay," though every nerve in my body screamed that we weren't. After locking every door and window in the house, I tucked August back into bed, though I knew sleep wouldn't come for either of us. I sat at the kitchen table, the box's secrets burning in my mind, and thought about the voice. How did he know my name? Why tonight, of all nights, did he appear? My grandmother had been dead only 2 weeks. Had her death unlocked something? A chain reaction of events I couldn't control. My fingers traced the edge of the table as though it could ground me, but the truth pulsed louder than my heartbeat. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. Someone had been waiting for me to find the attic, waiting to see if I'd take the bait. And now that I had, there was no going back. The game had started, and I was already a pawn. I didn't dare return to the attic that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The letters, photo, the will with my name on it. My grandmother had left breadcrumbs, and I was determined to follow them, no matter where they led. I thought of Eleanor, this ghost of a woman who may have been more than just my grandmother's lover. Could she be the missing piece of my own story? The reason my life had always felt unfinished. I clenched my fists, fury rising like fire in my chest. Whoever tried to scare me tonight had underestimated me. They thought fear would silence me, but it did the opposite. It woke something fierce inside me. If Grandma Celeste had suffered in silence her whole life, I refused to do the same. I would find the truth. And when I did, I would burn down the lies that had kept us all in chains. Sleep never came that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn painted the windows gray. My fingers wrapped around a cold coffee mug I hadn't touched. August had drifted off eventually, but every creak of the house jolted me upright, expecting the stranger to return. When the first rays of sunlight touched the backyard oak tree, I made a decision. I couldn't ignore the box any longer. I crept back into the attic, heart thudding as if the shadows themselves were alive. I pulled the trunk aside and dragged the box out again. Dust floated in golden beams around me, like spirits disturbed. I untied the red ribbon from the letters and spread them across the floor, forcing myself to read slowly this time. It wasn't just love written on those pages. It was desperation. Each letter painted my grandmother not as a dutiful wife, but as a prisoner. The more I read, the more my grandmother transformed before my eyes. Celeste Crane, who always preached patience and endurance, had spent decades writing about escape. She dreamed of running away with Eleanor, of buying a small house in Vermont where they could live without shame. She described secret meetings in motels, coded phone calls, and nights crying herself to sleep when Walter grew suspicious. I could almost hear her voice through the ink, begging fate for a chance to love freely. My chest ached with anger and sorrow. She hadn't just been hiding passion. She'd been burying her entire soul. And yet, what haunted me most wasn't the longing. It was the bitterness. One letter ended with words that froze my blood. If they ever find out, they will destroy us both. Promise me you'll keep Marigold safe. My name again. Staring at the page, I felt my entire identity unravel. I picked up the faded photograph again, tracing Eleanor's face with my fingertip. She looked no older than 30 in the picture, her auburn hair catching the sun like fire. There was something hauntingly familiar about her smile, the tilt of her jaw, the arch of her eyebrows. I stumbled into the attic mirror, holding the photo beside my face, and the truth slammed into me like a car crash. I looked like her, not a little uncannily. The resemblance was undeniable, more than coincidence, more than chance. My knees buckled as I clutched the photo to my chest. Could it be possible? Could Eleanor have been more than just my grandmother's lover? Could she have been my biological grandmother? So what did that mean about my mother? About me? The attic seemed to tilt, the weight of generations pressing down, daring me to piece together the truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. I carried the photograph downstairs and sat on the couch, staring at it as though it might speak if I looked hard enough. The house felt suffocating, each tick of the clock louder than the last. Memories flooded me. Moments that had always felt odd but never explained. My mother's refusal to talk about her childhood, the way she avoided questions about her father, her bitterness toward Grandma Celeste. It all made sense now. My mother had grown up under the shadow of a love she couldn't understand or forgive. She had been raised in a house where truth was forbidden, where silence was law. And I, unknowingly, had inherited that silence. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. There was one person who might hold the missing piece. My mother, Lorraine. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since our last argument about my divorce, but now I had no choice. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice sharp as always. "What is it, Marigold?" I swallowed hard, gripping the photo. "Mom, found something. In Grandma's attic." There was a pause on the line, too long, too heavy. Then she exhaled sharply. "I told her to burn those damn letters." My heart stuttered. "So you knew?" Silence again, then a clipped response. "Not on the phone. Don't ever bring this up on the phone. Do you understand me?" My pulse raced. "Mom, what are you afraid of? Who was Eleanor?" Her voice dropped, shaking in a way I'd never heard. "If you value your son, stop digging. Some secrets were buried for a reason." And then she hung up. I sat in stunned silence, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, my mother's warning rattling in my bones. She wasn't just angry, she was terrified. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream at the walls for answers. Instead, I pressed the photo against my forehead, closing my eyes. My mother's reaction told me everything. The truth was dangerous. But why? This wasn't just a scandalous love story anymore. It was something bigger, darker. Someone had forced my grandmother into silence. Someone had stolen her chance at happiness. And now, decades later, they were still watching, still ready to protect the secret with fear. The stranger in my house last night wasn't random. He was part of the machinery that had kept Eleanor erased from history. My fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms. If they thought fear would stop me, they didn't know me at all. I had survived betrayal, divorce, heartbreak. I wasn't about to be scared into silence by ghosts in the dark. Determination flared in me like fire, and I knew what I had to do next. If my mother wouldn't talk, I'd find someone who would. My grandmother's letters mentioned a small motel off Route 17 where she and Eleanor used to meet. I remembered the name, Maple Rest Inn, scrawled in the margins of one of the letters. It was still standing, a relic from the 60s, just 15 minutes away. I grabbed my keys, slipped the photograph into my bag, and told August we were going for a drive. He didn't question it. He trusted me completely. As we drove through town, the weight of history pressed against my chest. Every street, every church, every diner felt complicit, as though the entire town had conspired to erase Eleanor from existence. But they hadn't counted on me. They hadn't counted on my refusal to let the truth die in shadows. The Maple Rest Inn looked tired, its neon sign flickering in daylight, paint peeling from its walls. The parking lot was cracked and empty, weeds pushing through the pavement like stubborn truths. I parked and sat for a moment, staring at the building. Part of me wanted to turn back, to protect August from whatever darkness might be waiting inside. But another part, the stronger part, refused. I stepped out, holding the photo in my hand, and walked into the lobby. The air smelled of mildew and old smoke. Behind the counter sat an elderly woman with thick glasses and hair the color of snow. She looked up slowly, eyes narrowing at me. "Can I help you?" My voice trembled as I placed the photo on the counter. "Do you remember her?" The woman's eyes flickered to the photo, then back to me. Her lips parted. And then she whispered, "You look just like her." Her words sank into me like a blade, cutting through doubt. My throat tightened as I leaned closer. "Please," I whispered, desperation cracking my voice. "Tell me who she was. Tell me everything you know." The woman hesitated, her hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses. She glanced around the empty lobby, as if someone might be listening. "Not here," she said softly. "Too many eyes. Too many ears. They never wanted anyone to know." My pulse hammered as I leaned in further. "Who's they?" The woman's face paled. She shook her head, whispering, "They'll do anything to keep it buried. You shouldn't have come here." My stomach twisted. She knew something. Something dangerous enough to still terrify her after all these years. I opened my mouth to beg, but before I could, the lobby door swung open, and a tall man in a dark coat stepped inside. His eyes locked onto me immediately. The man who stepped into the lobby was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of presence that made the air heavier.
Things you remember.
His coat was long and dark,
Little moments that
his
stick
face
with you,
sharp,
even
carved
after
with
all this
lines of
time.
someone who had lived too long in the shadows. His eyes locked onto mine immediately, cold and unblinking, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The elderly woman behind the counter stiffened. Her lips pressed tight like she'd just swallowed a scream. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice low, steady, almost rehearsed. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to me. My pulse rattled in my ears as I instinctively stepped in front of August, shielding him. The man's gaze flicked to the photograph on the counter, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He knew exactly what I had found, and worse. He looked like he had been expecting me all along. The old woman's hand trembled as she reached for the phone, but the man shot her a glare that froze her in place. "Don't," he said simply, and she dropped her hand as though burned. My throat felt dry as I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" I asked, clutching the photograph like a weapon. His mouth curved into a humorless smile. "Someone who remembers when people knew their place." The words were a blade, sharp with contempt. He took a slow step toward me, and I felt August clutch my sleeve tighter. The room seemed to shrink with every move he made, the faded wallpaper closing in around us. The woman behind the desk whispered, "Leave her alone, Jack." My stomach lurched. She knew him. That meant he wasn't just some stranger. He was part of the history I'd stumbled into, part of the secret my grandmother had tried so hard to bury. I squared my shoulders, though fear shook my bones. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice louder than I felt. Jack stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady. "To stop you from digging up things that don't belong to you. The past is the past. Let it stay dead." My fingers tightened around the photograph until the edges cut into my skin. "This is my family," I shot back. "If you think I'm going to walk away, you don't know me." His smile faded. For a long moment, silence thickened between us. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss only I could hear. "If you keep pushing, you'll lose more than you already have. Trust me. Some truths aren't worth the price." My stomach knotted, but anger burned hotter than fear. "You think you can scare me?" I whispered. He leaned back, eyes glinting. "I don't have to. The truth will do that on its own." August's small hand squeezed mine, grounding me, reminding me I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I turned to the woman at the desk, desperation spilling out of me. "Please, tell me about Eleanor. Tell me what you know." Her eyes darted to Jack, then back to me. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her entire body trembling. Jack's stare was a cage around her, locking her words inside. "Don't," he warned. Something in his tone wasn't just threatening. It was commanding, like he had held power over her for years. My chest ached with frustration. Every second felt like a tug of war between truth and silence was winning. But then, the woman's gaze softened as she looked at August. She pressed her lips together, and in a whisper so faint I almost missed it, she breathed. "She was the bravest woman I ever knew." It was enough. The words cracked something open inside me. Bravery. My grandmother had written about Eleanor's fire, her strength, her refusal to bow. But bravery often has enemies, and Jack's looming presence was proof of that. I turned back to him, rage bubbling. "You can stand here and threaten me all you want, but you can't erase her. Not anymore." His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment I thought he might strike me right there in front of my son. Instead, he exhaled slowly, the storm retreating behind his eyes. "This isn't the place," he muttered, and without another word, he turned and walked out the door. The bell above it jingled softly, almost mocking the terror he left in his wake. I stood frozen, chest heaving, waiting for him to return. But he didn't. The silence he left behind was louder than his threats. When the door finally shut, The old woman sagged into her chair, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her glasses onto the desk. I rushed to her side, gripping her arm gently. "Please," I begged. "I don't know who he is or why he cares, but I need answers. I need to know who Eleanor was to my grandmother, to me." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at me. "Child, you don't understand. Eleanor was light, but light always casts shadows. And some of those shadows never left this town." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "Your grandmother loved her more than life itself. And because of that, both of them paid a terrible price." My heart lurched. "What price?" I demanded, but before she could answer, she shook her head violently. "I've already said too much. If Jack saw me talking, I'll never be safe." Her refusal hit me like a slap, but I couldn't blame her. She was terrified, and terror has roots deeper than reason. Still, I couldn't leave empty-handed. "Please," I whispered softer now. "Just tell me one thing. Was Eleanor family?" The woman's eyes flickered with hesitation, and then, with a trembling hand, she reached across the counter and touched my cheek. "Blood is a complicated thing, sweetheart. Sometimes it's thicker than water, and sometimes it drowns you. But yes, she was yours, in ways they never wanted you to know." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Confirmation. Not complete, not clean, but enough. I clutched the photo tighter, tears burning my eyes. My grandmother hadn't just hidden a lover. She had hidden blood. Blood that flowed into me. And if Jack was willing to threaten me over it, then the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was explosive. Driving home, the photograph lay on the passenger seat, staring at me like a silent witness. August sat quietly in the back, unusually subdued, his big eyes watching me through the mirror. "Mom," he said softly, "are we in trouble?" My throat tightened. I wanted to protect him from the storm I had unleashed, but lies had already poisoned this family for too long. "We're not in trouble," I said gently, though my voice cracked. "We're searching for answers. And sometimes, answers are scary." He nodded slowly, curling against the window, his trust in me unwavering. I envied that trust, because inside I was drowning in questions that clawed at my chest. Why did Jack care? Why did my mother tremble at Eleanor's name? And most of all, what truth was still hiding in the shadows? The road stretched ahead like a battlefield, and I knew I was only at the beginning. That night, I tucked August into bed and sat alone in the dark, staring at the box on the kitchen table. The letters, the will, the photograph. They weren't just relics anymore, they were weapons. Weapons aimed at the heart of my family. I thought of my grandmother, trapped in her marriage, writing letters she never sent, praying someone someday would understand. And I thought of Eleanor, erased, silenced, turned into a ghost that haunted everyone who dared remember her. My chest ached with rage. They deserved justice. They deserved to be seen, not hidden in an attic like shameful secrets. Jack and whoever stood behind him wanted silence. But I wasn't Celeste, forced into submission. I was Marigold, and I was done being silent. With shaking hands, I whispered into the darkness. "You took her voice. You will not take mine." And with that, the war officially began. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the same questions, like a scratched record stuck on the worst part of a song. Why had my father hidden this? Why had Grandma been left to rot in bitterness while he lived a comfortable life in Florida? As dawn broke, I sat at my kitchen table with the box open again, spreading every letter across the wood like broken glass. I noticed new details. Dates lining up with the very years my father had built his real estate empire. The exact years Grandma had supposedly fallen ill. My hands trembled. It wasn't illness that silenced her. It was betrayal. And the man I had trusted my whole life, my father, looked like a thief wearing a mask of respectability. The realization was a fire in my veins. For the first time, I thought of revenge not as an idea, but as a necessity. The next morning I called Aunt Thelma. She was Grandma's younger sister, still alive at 76, living in a small retirement community 2 towns over. My father rarely mentioned her, usually with an edge in his voice, dismissing her as bitter and broke. But I needed answers. When she picked up, her voice cracked with surprise at hearing from me. I told her about the box. Silence filled the line, heavy as a tomb. Then she whispered, "So you finally know." My stomach dropped. She knew. All these years, she had been carrying the same truth, waiting for someone to dig it up. I asked if I could see her. She agreed instantly, almost with relief, like a dam had been waiting to burst. I felt like I was walking into a storm that had been building for decades. When I arrived, Aunt Thelma's apartment smelled of lavender and dust. She was smaller than I remembered, her frame bent but her eyes sharp, glowing with a fire my father could never extinguish. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She pointed at the box I carried and said, "She wanted you to find it." My knees weakened. She motioned for me to sit, then began unraveling a story that twisted my entire sense of family. Grandma had invested her entire pension in my father's first company, trusting him blindly. Instead of honoring her, he had forged documents, pushed her out, and taken everything. The illness story was a lie. She had been silenced by depression, betrayal, and shame. I clutched the arm of the couch as her words painted the picture I had been too naive to see. Grandma wasn't just betrayed, she was erased. My father had not only stolen money but stolen her dignity, her history, her voice. I asked why no one spoke of it. Aunt Thelma's face tightened with anger. Fear. He had power, money, lawyers. What did we have? She begged me not to drag you kids into it. But she wanted the truth to surface someday. That's why she hid the box. Felt sick. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time I hugged my father, I had been embracing the very man who destroyed her. Driving home, my hands shook on the wheel. The streets of town blurred past. The familiar landmarks now strange under the weight of revelation. The betrayal stretched further than money, poisoned everything. It meant my childhood vacations to Florida had been funded by stolen blood. It meant every birthday gift, every college fund contribution, was dirty. I pulled over, my chest heaving. The world had tilted sideways. For the first time, I understood why Grandma looked at him with icy silence during holidays. I had thought it was distance, the way some parents and children drift apart. Well, it had been a battlefield we all ignored, and now I stood in the ruins of it. That night, I pulled out the letters again, this time pairing them with what Aunt Thelma had told me. The timelines aligned perfectly. My father's first property acquisition matched the very year Grandma lost her savings. His sudden rise in the community coincided with her sudden retreat into isolation. I remembered her hands trembling as she passed the gravy boat at Thanksgiving, the way her eyes lingered on him with sorrow and fury. I realized those weren't just looks. They were daggers she couldn't throw. My entire childhood flashed in new colors, as if someone had peeled away a filter. And in those colors, my father wasn't a provider. He was a predator. But here's the thing about betrayal. Once you know, you can't unknow. And once I knew, I couldn't sit still. I thought of calling him, screaming at him, demanding the truth. But that felt too easy. Men like him thrive on control. If I exploded, he'd dismiss me as emotional, unstable, ungrateful. I needed to play his game. I needed to learn patience. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about strategy. I poured myself a glass of wine and began jotting notes in a journal. Step 1. Gather undeniable proof. Step 2. Expose him where it hurt most. Step 3. Never let him see it coming. I spent the next weeks digging through public records, property deeds, and archived newspapers. It was shocking how much could be unearthed with a little persistence. There it was in black and white. Grandma's pension fund deposits, company filings with my father's name suddenly appearing as sole owner, discrepancies in dates that no honest man could explain away. Each discovery was a knife twisting deeper into the truth. I built a folder so thick it barely closed, a weapon disguised as paperwork. But with each piece of evidence, I also felt the weight of fear. He wasn't just my father. He was a respected man in town, friends with judges, lawyers, pastors. Going against him felt like throwing myself into a lion's den. One night, I dreamed of Grandma. She stood at the end of a long hallway, holding the same dusty box, her face calm but her eyes burning with sorrow. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. I woke up shaking, the message clear as day. I couldn't let this rot in silence. If I did, I'd become just like the rest of the family. Complicit, cowardly, chained by fear. My pulse quickened. The path forward was dangerous, but it was mine. And in the quiet of that morning, with the sun barely rising, I made a promise to her memory. I would not rest until the truth was laid bare. But promises come with consequences. As I looked at my wall of notes, photos, and documents, a realization hit me like a cold slap. If he discovered what I was doing, he'd destroy me before I could expose him. My job, my reputation, my safety. Nothing would be off limits. I stared at the folder in my lap, my heart pounding. It wasn't just evidence. It was a loaded gun. And in the wrong hands, it could kill me socially, financially, even physically. That night, I slid it under my bed, but sleep refused to come. Because in my bones, I knew the truth. The war had already begun. The first sign that my father suspected something was wrong came during a Sunday dinner. We gathered at his lakefront house, the one he loved to flaunt whenever neighbors visited. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, but beneath it, something sour lingered, tension. He studied me longer than usual, his eyes sharp, calculating, like he was peeling back my skin to see what lay beneath. "You've been quiet lately," he said, slicing his chicken with deliberate force. "Busy with work." His tone wasn't casual. It was bait. I forced a smile, nodding, pretending I hadn't spent weeks digging through records of his crimes. My hand stayed steady on the fork, but inside, my heart thumped so loud I swore it rattled the wine glasses. That night, I realized my time for preparation was running out. If I wasn't careful, he'd discover the war before I was ready to strike. After dinner, he pulled me aside near the fireplace, his favorite place to display the family's framed achievements. His voice dropped, softer but more dangerous. "I hope you know how much I've done for this family. All those years of sacrifice." He gripped my shoulder with the kind of force that pretends to be love. "Don't let gossip or old ghosts cloud your judgment." My breath caught. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to sense I was wandering into forbidden territory. I smiled weakly, murmuring thanks, but my mind screamed. That moment, I saw the mask slip just slightly, revealing the paranoia underneath. He wasn't just a villain. He was a cornered animal. And cornered animals fight viciously. Driving home that night, the lake's reflection shimmering in my rearview, I realized something terrifying. If he truly suspected, he might already be moving against me. Men like him didn't wait for proof. They destroyed threats before they could grow teeth. I imagined my boss receiving strange rumors about me, my bank accounts hacked, maybe even my car accidentally tampered with. It wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. He had played this game before with Grandma, with Aunt Thelma, with anyone who dared question him. Now it was my turn in the crosshairs. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. If survival was part of the war, I needed to shield myself while preparing to strike harder. The thought chilled me, but it also ignited something new. Fear sharpening into determination. The following week I became two people. By day, I was the dutiful daughter, calling him with updates about work, sharing photos of my dog, acting like nothing had changed. By night, I was the investigator, piecing together the last fragments of the puzzle, scanning old legal cases, visiting the county courthouse, interviewing retired employees who had once worked under him. The more I learned, the darker it grew. There were whispers of shady land deals, bribes slipped to city officials, even workers' pensions misplaced during construction projects. It wasn't just Grandma he betrayed. He built his empire on bones and broken promises. My rage grew like wildfire. But so did my resolve. I had to be smarter, quieter, deadlier. One evening Aunt Thelma called me. Her voice was nervous, almost trembling. "He came by," she whispered, "knocking on my door asking questions about you." I didn't tell him anything, but my stomach dropped. He was circling closer, hunting for weakness. I thanked her, but after hanging up, panic surged. He was testing the waters, gauging who might stand against him. That meant my window of secrecy was shrinking. I walked around my apartment, pacing, my pulse racing like a drum. The walls felt too close, too fragile. For the first time, I considered that exposing him might not just destroy him. It might put me in danger I couldn't control. But then I remembered Grandma's hollow eyes in those photos, the silence she endured. Fear, I realized, was exactly the weapon he had always used. And I refused to let it chain me. Still, I knew I needed allies. One person against a man like him was suicide. That week, I reached out to an old college friend, Marcy, now a local journalist with a reputation for digging into corruption. Over coffee in a quiet diner, I slid the thick folder across the table. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the documents, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is huge," she whispered. "But it's dangerous. He's powerful, connected. If I run with this, he'll come for you." I swallowed hard, staring at the scratched Formica table. "He already is," I said. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we need more than documents. We need testimony. People willing to speak. If we get that, he won't just be embarrassed. He'll be finished." For the first time, I felt like the tide might turn in my favor. But alliances come at a cost. The more people knew, the more exposed I became. That week, my phone started buzzing with unknown numbers. Silence greeted me when I answered, followed by the faint click of a hang-up. Once, late at night, I swore I saw a black SUV idling near my streetlight, its headlights off. My chest tightened. Whether paranoia or reality, I couldn't tell. But either way, the message was clear. He was watching. Every shadow, every whisper felt like his presence crawling closer. Yet instead of retreating, it fueled me. If he wanted to scare me into silence, he underestimated me. I wasn't Grandma, forced into quiet shame. I was her granddaughter, carrying her voice now like a blade. And I was ready to use it. One night, I pulled the box from under my bed and spread the letters across the floor. Candlelight flickered against the old paper, illuminating every ink stroke like sacred scripture. I read each one slowly, letting Grandma's pain, hope, and anger seep into me. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. Each letter was a piece of her soul, and now they were pieces of my armor. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. My cheeks were wet, but my heart felt steel-forged. Revenge wasn't about destroying him anymore. It was about redemption, about giving Grandma back the dignity he stole. And that clarity made me fearless. Yet, as I packed the letters carefully back into the box, I couldn't shake a chilling thought. Wars weren't won without sacrifices. Grandma had lost her savings, her peace, her voice. Aunt Thelma had lost years of her life to fear. And me. What would I lose before this ended? My job, my safety, my life. The question burned in my chest, but I refused to turn back. Some truths were too heavy to bury. Some betrayals too poisonous to forgive. I placed the box back under the bed and whispered into the silence. "I'm ready, Grandma." But even as I spoke, I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. My breath caught. The war wasn't just approaching, it had arrived. The footsteps outside my apartment haunted me long after they faded. I sat frozen on the couch, the box still beneath my bed, listening for any sound that confirmed I wasn't imagining it. But nothing came. Just silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's shadow had crossed my threshold. The next morning, as I stepped outside, I noticed a folded envelope wedged into the crack of my front door. My stomach tightened as I unfolded it. No words, just a single photograph of me leaving Aunt Thelma's building. A chill ran through my spine. It wasn't paranoia anymore. He was watching me, documenting my moves, just like a hunter marks its prey. My hands shook as I stuffed the photo into my jacket pocket. The game wasn't hidden anymore. He had made the first open move. I drove to work that morning on autopilot, my mind spinning through scenarios like a film reel gone wild. The office, usually a place of routine comfort, now felt exposed. My computer screen blurred before me as I wondered if he had already poisoned this space too. Would rumors about me start spreading? Would my boss suddenly find reasons to doubt me? Every coworker's glance felt loaded with suspicion. I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my pale reflection, whispering, "Stay calm." Fear was what he wanted. Control was his currency. I had to hold my ground. Still, when I got back to my desk, my email inbox blinked with an anonymous message. "You're digging in graves that should stay closed." My chest tightened. It wasn't just him anymore. He had people helping him. That night, I drove to Aunt Thelma's again. Her small apartment was a safe harbor, though even she seemed shaken. She clutched her robe tight as she opened the door, whispering, "He's escalating, isn't he?" I nodded, showing her the photograph and the email. She sank into her chair, her face pale. He always did this. Intimidation, whispers, shadows. That's how he kept us quiet. I sat beside her, taking her trembling hand in mine. "But we're not going to stay quiet," I said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears. "Your grandmother would be so proud." For the first time, the weight of what I carried felt less suffocating. We weren't alone. But deep down, I knew pride wasn't enough. We needed a plan before his shadows turned into something worse. Over the next week, Marcy and I doubled our efforts. She began interviewing old employees quietly, slipping into nursing homes and diners where retired workers still gathered. Some shook their heads, terrified to speak. Others, though, shared enough to confirm what I already knew. My father's empire had been built on deceit, broken contracts, stolen pensions. Marcy recorded everything, cataloging names, dates, and testimonies. Still, she warned me, "We're missing one big voice. Someone who was directly connected to your grandmother's loss." My heart sank. Grandma was gone. Aunt Thelma had her memories, but no paper trail. We needed more than just whispers and letters. We needed something undeniable. And then, one night, as I reread Grandma's final letter, I noticed a name scribbled in the margin. Daryl Morton. I didn't recognize it, but it felt like a key waiting to be turned. The next morning I began the search. It didn't take long. Daryl was a retired accountant living 3 hours away. His name buried in the archives of my father's first company. My heart raced as I dialed his number, unsure if he would even remember or care. To my surprise, his voice was sharp, clear, tinged with bitterness. "You're her granddaughter?" he asked after I introduced myself. I wondered how long it would take before someone called. My pulse spiked. He knew. Without hesitation. He invited me to his home, saying there were things he had kept all these years, things that could expose the truth once and for all. I agreed, a mix of excitement and fear burning in my chest. But as I hung up, I glanced at the photograph still on my counter. What if my father already knew I had found Daryl? When I pulled into Daryl's driveway 2 days later, the sky was gray, clouds heavy with the threat of rain. His house was small, neat, lined with rose bushes that seemed too delicate to guard the secrets inside. Daryl greeted me at the door, his silver hair combed back, his eyes tired but sharp. He led me to a back room filled with old filing cabinets and boxes. "I kept copies," he said, pulling out a folder thick with yellowed documents. "Your grandmother trusted me." I couldn't stop what he did, but I couldn't let it vanish either. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Contracts, signatures, withdrawals, transfers, all pointing to my father siphoning her funds into his own accounts. The proof was undeniable. My breath caught. This was the weapon I needed. But as I tucked the folder into my bag, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that we weren't alone. That night, as I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. First, I thought it was coincidence. But the car stayed with me every turn, every lane change. My throat went dry. I sped up, they sped up. My fingers clenched the wheel as I pulled abruptly into a gas station, heart pounding. The car slowed, idled at the edge of the lot, then peeled away into the night. I sat frozen, gasping for breath, the folder pressed against my chest. There was no doubt now. He knew I had the evidence. The war had shifted. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. He was chasing me, circling me like prey. I whispered to myself, "Hold on. Don't let fear win." But my whole body shook. The battle lines were clear now, and I was standing in the center. The next day, Marcy's newsroom received a warning. A letter, typed and anonymous, claiming she was fabricating lies to ruin an honorable man's reputation. The editor, nervous about lawsuits, pulled her aside, advising caution. She called me, her voice tight. "He's tightening the net. If we don't move soon, he'll bury us." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the box, the letters, the new folder from Daryl. My father was pressing harder, faster, trying to suffocate us before we could breathe. Fear licked at me like flames, but so did fury. Every move he made confirmed what he was. Guilty, desperate, afraid of the truth. And that gave me strength. The closer he circled, the closer I was to breaking him open. The question was, how much would I lose before the strike? That night, unable to sleep, I sat by my window, staring out at the street below. Car passed. Another paused too long at the corner. My mind swam with images of Grandma, of Aunt Thelma, of Daryl handing me those documents with trembling hands. I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For all of them, for everyone silenced by him. My pulse steadied as a plan formed in my mind. If he wanted to play in shadows, I would drag him into the light. I would make him face the world, stripped of his mask. My hands gripped the edge of the table as resolve burned through me. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And I wasn't backing down. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, elegant and smug. My father's retirement celebration. It was to be held at the country club he adored, the one he built with stolen money. I stared at the embossed letters, bile rising in my throat. An evening honoring decades of integrity and leadership, it read. Integrity. Leadership. Ways. My hands clenched so tightly the card bent in half. This wasn't just a party. It was a coronation, one final victory lap before he slipped into luxury unpunished. But as I set the invitation down beside the box of letters and Daryl's folder, a thought struck me. What if this was the moment? What if, instead of hiding in shadows, I let the truth explode under the very chandeliers he chose to bask in? My pulse quickened. The battlefield wasn't coming. I had just been handed the perfect stage. Still fear nagged at me. Walking into that room meant walking into his world. His friends, his allies, his judges and lawyers who owed him favors. If I spoke there, it wouldn't just be risky. It could be social suicide. But then I pictured Grandma's hollow eyes again. The silence she endured while he rose higher and higher. I thought of Aunt Thelma's trembling hands, of Daryl clutching those files with bitterness carved into his face. They had all been forced into corners, silenced, dismissed. I couldn't let it end that way. If he wanted to bask in the glow of his so-called legacy, then I would tear the mask off under that same light. The decision hardened inside me like stone. I would go to that party, and I wouldn't leave quietly. The week leading up to the event was a blur of preparation. Marcy and I met every night, piecing together the order of documents, planning the words that would pierce the lies cleanly, directly. She warned me again and again. He'll fight back. He'll spin it. You need to hit him where he can't wriggle free. I rehearsed my speech late into the night, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as conviction anchored me. Every word I crafted wasn't just mine. It was Grandma's voice, Aunt Thelma's rage, Daryl's buried truth. Still a knot twisted in my stomach. What if no one believed me? What if they all turned on me instead? The fear clung to me like a shadow, but the fire of revenge burned hotter. Doubt wouldn't stop me now. The night of the event, I stood in front of my mirror, pulling on a black dress, simple but sharp. My hands shook as I applied mascara, though my eyes were steady, almost unrecognizable. I looked older, harder, as though the past months had aged me years. When I arrived at the country club, valet lights flickered across luxury cars lined like trophies. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hollow praise of wealthy men congratulating themselves. My father stood at the center, beaming, his arm around my stepmother, wearing his mask of charm so flawlessly you'd never know the monster underneath. For a moment, fear almost dragged me back. But then his eyes met mine across the room, and in that instant I knew. He saw me not as a daughter, but as a threat. The speeches began with toasts from his colleagues, all praising his vision and sacrifice. My father soaked it in like a king on his throne. Each word was a dagger to my chest. I sat at the edge of the crowd, the folder heavy in my bag, my fingers tracing the edge of the letters. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard the clinking glasses. Then his voice boomed over the microphone, smooth and polished. I stand here tonight proud of what I've built, grateful for the family and friends who stood by me. Family. My blood boiled. That was my cue. I rose, legs trembling but steady, the folder in my hand. The crowd turned as I stepped forward. My father's smile faltered for the first time. His mask cracked just slightly. The moment had come. I cleared my throat, my voice sharp against the soft clinking of silverware. Funny, I said, my words carrying further than I expected. Because this isn't the whole story. A hush fell over the room. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Sit down, he hissed under his breath, but I didn't move. I opened the folder, pulling out the first letter. This is from my grandmother, written in 1989. She invested her pension in his company, trusting him, believing in him. And what did he do? He stole it. Gasps rippled through the audience. My hands trembled, but my voice grew stronger. I laid document after document on the podium, each one a nail in his coffin. His face turned red, sweat beading at his temple. The mask was crumbling piece by piece, in front of everyone who once adored him. My father tried to interrupt, laughing nervously. Old letters, misunderstandings. She was ill, she didn't know what she was talking about. But Marcy had prepared me. I held up Daryl's documents, the contracts with forged signatures, the withdrawals traced directly into his accounts. Explain this then, I said, my voice cutting through the room. Silence. All eyes turned to him, waiting. For the first time in my life he looked small, vulnerable. His mouth opened, then shut again like a fish gasping on dry land. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Doubt had cracked the foundation of his empire, and I could feel it trembling beneath us. The power he had wielded for decades was slipping, replaced with suspicion, disgust. I felt Grandma's presence beside me, her silence finally broken. The tension snapped when Aunt Thelma, trembling but fierce, rose from her seat. It's true, she said, her voice carrying. He ruined her. He ruined my sister. Her declaration was like a match to gasoline. People whispered louder now, some standing, others glaring at him with betrayal in their eyes. My father's face twisted with rage as he turned toward her, but his words were drowned out by the rising swell of voices. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth. My knees nearly buckled with relief. The dam had broken. The secret, once buried, was now laid bare for the world to see. As the room descended into chaos, I slipped outside onto the veranda, my chest heaving. Cool night air rushed over me, and tears streamed down my cheeks, not just from fear, but from release. For so long, Grandma's story had been suffocated, locked away, and now it was free. I could hear my father shouting inside, trying desperately to regain control, but the voices drowned him out. The mask was gone, shattered beyond repair. Yet as I gripped the railing, catching my breath, a sobering realization hit me. This wasn't over. Men like him didn't crumble in one night. They clawed, they fought, they destroyed. And now, I had exposed myself as his enemy fully, irreversibly. The war was no longer in the shadows. It was out in the open, and the next battle would be bloodier than ever. The days after the party felt like living inside a storm. News spread fast. Whispers turned into articles into full-blown headlines. Respected businessman accused of fraud. My father's name was suddenly dragged through mud he had once forced everyone else to crawl through. But storms don't just destroy one house. They rip through entire neighborhoods. My phone rang non-stop, relatives begging me to stop, family friends warning me that I'd ruined my own reputation. Some believed me, others called me ungrateful, a traitor to blood. Walking down the street, I felt eyes on me, some filled with sympathy, others with disgust. I had imagined victory would taste sweet, but instead it was bitter, laced with isolation. Still deep down I knew the truth was finally free. And once the truth is free, it cannot be chained again, no matter how loudly he screamed his innocence. My father, of course, fought back. Within 48 hours, his lawyers filed defamation suits against me, against Aunt Thelma, even against Marcy. He plastered the media with statements about vengeful family members spreading lies to tarnish a legacy of hard work. I watched him on television, his voice still smooth, his suit immaculate, spinning the narrative like a master craftsman. To the untrained eye, he looked like a victim, cornered by jealous relatives. Rage boiled inside me as commentators nodded along, feeding his version of events. But I also saw something else, hidden beneath his polished tone: desperation. His eyes darted more than usual, his jaw clenched tighter, his laugh carried a nervous edge. The empire was cracking, and he was clawing to hold it together. For the first time I knew he felt threatened, and that meant I was winning. But victory came at a cost. Aunt Thelma called me late one night, her voice trembling. Men in suits came to my house, she whispered. They said they were there to check on a complaint, but I know they were sent to scare me. My stomach dropped. The same night, Marcy texted me a photo of her car window shattered, a brick lying in the driver's seat. He was sending messages, silent threats wrapped in plausible deniability. I lay awake in the dark, every creak of the house amplified, imagining footsteps outside my door. This was his way of reminding me. He still had power, he still had reach, and he would use fear like a scalpel, cutting into everyone I loved until I backed down. But fear was a language I was done obeying. Instead, I dug deeper. Daryl had more files, bank transfers, offshore accounts, records hidden under shell companies. He'd been too scared to share them before, but now he pushed them into my hands. "He'll destroy us anyway," Daryl said, his face pale, eyes hollow. "Might as well go down swinging." Together, Marcy and I organized the evidence, building a case strong enough to make lawyers hesitate. The plan wasn't just exposure now. It was survival. I needed to prove beyond doubt that everything I said was real. The party had been the spark, but this was the firestorm. I wasn't just fighting for Grandma's voice anymore. I was fighting for mine, for Daryl's, for everyone who'd been chewed up by my father's empire and spit out in silence. The retaliation escalated. Strangers followed me in cars, headlights lingering in my rearview mirror longer than coincidence allowed. Anonymous calls buzzed my phone at midnight, breathing heavy, then hanging up. At work, whispers spread. My boss pulled me aside, saying, "You're drawing too much attention, it's bad for business." Every corner of my life was under siege, and I felt myself unraveling. But then I remembered that night on the veranda, the way the crowd's voices had drowned him out. That memory became my anchor. He wanted me to crumble, to crawl back into silence. I refused. Every threat was proof that I had struck the heart of his power. And so, I clung tighter to the evidence, refusing to let his fear seep into my bones. He had built his empire on silence. I would dismantle it with noise. Still, doubt crept in when I saw the toll on others. Aunt Thelma stopped answering calls, too scared to be involved. Daryl began drinking heavier, his paranoia spiraling, convinced every shadow outside his window was one of my father's men. And Marcy, my brave, relentless ally, started receiving threats at her workplace, anonymous emails warning her to drop the case or lose everything. I wanted to tell them to step back to protect themselves, but they had already sacrificed too much. The guilt weighed on me like chains. I was dragging everyone into a war they didn't ask for. Some nights I lay awake wondering, was revenge worth this? But then I'd hear Grandma's voice in my mind, steady and firm. Do not let him win. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, raw and necessary. The breaking point came when I returned home one evening to find my apartment door ajar. My chest tightened as I stepped inside, heart hammering. The place had been ransacked, drawers overturned, papers scattered, the folder with Daryl's files missing. Panic clawed at my throat. He had reached into my sanctuary, violated the only space I thought was mine. I sank to the floor, shaking, fury mixing with fear. But then my eyes caught something taped to the refrigerator. A note scrawled in bold black marker. Stop, or next time it won't just be papers. My hands trembled as I ripped it down. He wanted me terrified, paralyzed. Instead, something inside me snapped. He could steal my documents, but he couldn't erase the truth now living in my voice, my memory, my will. If he wanted war, then war he would get. The next morning, I marched into a journalist's office with copies of the evidence Marcy had secretly duplicated. I laid everything out on the desk. The letters, the contracts, the transfers. Publish it, I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. All of it. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman who'd spent years chasing corruption stories, leaned forward with a smile that told me she smelled blood. You understand once this goes live, there's no going back, she asked. He nodded. There's no back left to go to. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like clarity. I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. The truth was my weapon, and I had just loaded the first bullet into the chamber. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the city lights flickering outside my window, waiting. My phone buzzed with incoming alerts as the story broke. Headline after headline flooding the internet. The evidence was out. His name, once untouchable, was now synonymous with fraud and betrayal. I imagined him watching, fists clenched, the mask finally shattered beyond repair. Yet, even in that moment of triumph, I knew better than to celebrate. Men like him didn't fall quietly. They dragged others down with them, clawing and thrashing until the very end. I whispered into the silence, I'm ready. Whether it was fear, anger, or destiny pushing me forward, I couldn't tell anymore. But I knew one thing. The war wasn't over. It was only entering its deadliest stage. The morning after the article exploded, the city felt different. Strangers stopped me on the street, whispering encouragement, their eyes shining with a mix of pity and admiration. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages, some from people who had also been crushed by my father's deals, thanking me for finally exposing him. For years, he'd been the puppet master, but now the strings had snapped, and the puppets were learning to move on their own. Yet beneath the applause, I sensed the calm before the storm. My father was not a man who went down quietly. He was a cornered predator now, and a predator fights hardest when bleeding. I knew he would strike soon. I just didn't know when or how. But I could feel it in the air, like thunder crawling low across the horizon, waiting to break. His retaliation came faster than I expected. That evening, a black SUV idled outside my apartment, its engine rumbling like a warning growl. I pulled the curtain back and locked eyes with the driver. A man in a sharp suit, his gaze unblinking. Minutes later, my phone lit up with a video call. My father's face filled the screen, no longer polished, but wild-eyed and furious. "You think you've won," he hissed. "You've destroyed this family. You've destroyed yourself." His voice cracked, not with weakness but with rage too heavy to carry. I refused to flinch. "The truth destroyed you," I said, my words cutting through the static. He leaned closer to the camera, whispering venom. "Truth doesn't matter when I control the story." Then the screen went black, and the SUV drove away, leaving silence like a gunshot in its wake. The next morning, the silence shattered. Police swarmed his mansion, news helicopters circling overhead. He was led out in handcuffs, his perfect suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled. Cameras flashed as he barked at reporters, calling it a witch hunt, blaming me, blaming Aunt Thelma, blaming the jealous. Watching from the safety of my living room, I felt a strange cocktail of relief and sorrow. This was the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, who had tucked me in at night with stories of building something lasting. And now he was just another headline, another villain unmasked. My chest ached, not with regret, but with the weight of what was lost. Revenge had tasted necessary, but it wasn't sweet. It was hollow like ashes dissolving on my tongue. But the twist came when Grandma's dusty box revealed its final secret. Hidden beneath the letters we had already found was a sealed envelope with my name written in her fragile handwriting. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside was a confession. She had known all along about the fraud, the lies, the betrayals. She had stayed silent to protect me, fearing that if she exposed him while alive, he would take me away from her. Her words bled with guilt, but also hope. "One day," she wrote, "you will see through his mask. And when you do, you will be strong enough to finish what I could not." Tears blurred the page. It was never just about money. It was about legacy, about love, about the war between silence and truth. She had left me not just evidence, but permission to fight. When the trial began, the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Former associates lined up to testify, their voices trembling with decades of buried fear. Aunt Thelma, despite her terror, took the stand and told the world how he had bullied, threatened, and ruined lives. Daryl, sober for the first time in years, admitted his own part but pointed squarely at my father as the architect of it all. Each testimony was a nail in the coffin of his empire. And yet, he sat there smirking, whispering to his lawyer, as if the walls closing in were just another game. I watched from the gallery, my fists clenched, reminding myself of Grandma's words. This wasn't just about watching him fall. It was about making sure his shadow never covered me, or anyone else again. The verdict came after weeks of tension. Guilty. On multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and coercion. The gavel slammed down like thunder, and the courtroom erupted. Some gasped, others wept, but I just sat frozen. I thought victory would feel like fireworks, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy. I had wanted this for so long, but standing in that moment, I realized revenge doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't erase the nights I lay awake trembling, or the scars he left on my soul. What it does is carve space for something new to grow, space free from his grasp. The crowd's cheers echoed, but in my heart, I whispered to Grandma, "We did it. We finished it." And for the first time in years, I felt her at peace. In the weeks that followed, rebuilding wasn't easy. The world looked at me differently. Some with respect, some with pity, some with envy. The scars of the battle lingered. Marcy struggled to find work again after the threats. Daryl slipped back into shadows, and Aunt Thelma retreated into quiet isolation. But I refused to let his destruction define my future. I used what settlement money came my way to start a community fund for people crushed by fraudulent schemes, naming it after Grandma. Each life I helped lift was like stitching a piece of myself back together. Revenge had been the fire, but justice, that was the water that cooled my wounds. It wasn't about burning everything down anymore. It was about planting something that could last. The final twist came months later, in a letter sent from prison. His handwriting was jagged, angry. "You may have won," he wrote, "but you carry my blood. You'll never escape me. One day, you'll look in the mirror and see me staring back." My hands shook as I held the paper. His poison trying to seep into me even from behind bars. But then I remembered Grandma's words, remembered the crowd drowning out his voice, remembered the freedom in choosing truth over fear. I burned the letter without reading another line, watching the flames eat away at his threat. For the first time I felt lighter. He no longer lived rent-free in my head. His words were smoke now, and I was still here, standing, breathing, free. And so, here I am, telling you this story not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as someone who chose to end a cycle of silence. My father thought revenge would consume me, but instead it carved me into someone stronger, someone unwilling to bow to fear. Grandma's dusty box wasn't just a container of secrets. It was a key that unlocked my voice, my courage, my future. And if you're watching this, maybe it's a reminder. The truth always fights its way out, no matter how deep it's buried. Sometimes it takes one person willing to set the match, to break the silence, to stand alone until others stand with them. Maybe that person could be you. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you cry, made you remember the power of truth, consider subscribing. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Stories that remind us we are never as powerless as they want us to believe. Until next time, remember, secrets may live in dusty boxes, but truth is always waiting for someone brave enough to open them.